roll call, please.
Brian Crawford,
Here.
Leonard Knapp,
Here.
Robert Meir,
Here.
Howard Fareed,
Here.
Sabrina Richardson,
Here.
Julie Simeon,
Present.
Jared Rickey,
Here.
Lenore Feely,
Here.
and Jason Hammond.
Here.
I'll ask for a moment of silence, please. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've had several requests from individuals to speak in regards to items on the agenda. Mr. Carl Brown here,
He is not.
Belinda Brown,
She is not.
Scott Wilson,
Willis.
Willison, I'm sorry. Do you represent?
Jake Brown.
Okay, we'll take you up when the matters come. And Floyd Alcon, and you're here to speak on items 3 and 4.
Yeah, particularly on the rule changes.
Okay. You want to go ahead and make your comments?
I'd like to hear comments first.
We all would like that first, Mr. Falcon. Why don't you step up? You got some comments on the proposed rule changes.
In the latest version that was provided to us by the director, the Troopers Association, there's been no objection.
That's it?
Well, we worked on it for months and months.
Well, that's what I
To get to
understood.
this point.
Well, good. What? All right. Thank you, sir. We'll move on then to, that was the opportunity for individuals to address the commission on items on the agenda other than as indicated, representatives of the parties involved, and particularly in item number 3, will speak on those issues at the time. Ms. Gerard, had you wanted to speak about the potential rule changes? Is that? Well,
Yes, and Colonel Davis is here. I think he's actually going to speak as well. We just had some concern with the additional language that was added. I don't know if you want to take it up now or wait.
all right, we'll take it up when the matter comes up. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I could, just for the audience's benefit, on the agenda, when we ask for comments on items that are on the agenda to speak at the beginning of the meeting, that's generally for the public to address the commission. It's not necessarily for people who are individuals who are going to be representing agencies or individuals during the course of the agenda. So just to alleviate that in the future and save you some paper and some ink. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. All right, first business item on the agenda is consideration of the January 14, 2021 minutes. Do we have any motions?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Rickey and a second by Commissioner Crawford to adopt the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Business item number 2 is consideration of a motion to defer the planned mandatory promotional exam until May 2022, and consider the upcoming 2021 examinations as optional due to the continued logistical concerns related to COVID-19 pandemic. Do we have any motions?
I'll make the motion to accept.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Rique and seconded. Any discussion? I guess I have a question unless someone else doesn't. Was there another commissioner that had come? Yes, Commissioner Crawford.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's just for Commissioner Mears, being the representative. The implications of this for the rank and file, can you just give me a quick summary version? I've read the text and.
Sure. There was a time period where when the pandemic started, people were at the different troops were becoming infected, were taking their time, sometimes as many as 2 weeks. Some people had lingered longer because of their age, so we had some people out 3 weeks. Some of them are still not covered in this, but because they were prior to April the 1st. However, I think there's an issue of where the money was available with the declaration. Is that correct? At April 1st?
I'm talking about the testing.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Item number 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right. So when I saw COVID-19, I'm sorry. In reference to the employees that are currently displaced in some areas, and also there's some issues of logistics as far as the employees with everything going on with COVID-19 and others. It'd be huge for the employee that we defer until 2022, have a mandatory retest. I think that a lot of employees would take a lot of stress off their lives they have in regards to everything else. But I think in 2022, and potentially we get on a 2-year, or at least an idea of expectation of a retest rather than can I keep my test this year, next year, et cetera. If we can get in a rhythm, I think that would be great for the employee and for the department.
So no employee is going to miss an opportunity for a promotion due to this delay.
Yes, correct. And they'll have an opportunity also to take the test this year.
Right. It's voluntary.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. That's all I
Any
have.
other commissioners? I guess my question would be related to going back to the discussion by Dr. Wise last meeting that we had. As I recall, Dr. Wise suggested that we make the upcoming test mandatory because of the age of the current test and because of changes. And I just wanted to make sure we factored that in. Has anyone talked to Dr. Wise since this proposal has come up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I actually spoke to Dr. Wise, and I received a statement from her yesterday, actually on the 9th, where she concurred that due to the uncertainty that still exists around COVID, the fact that the mandatory examination would roughly relate to 500 plus testers, as opposed to 200 that we were able to accommodate in August last year, and her review and discussion with the subject matter experts that the test that could be provided in May would not be significantly different than the previous test, and therefore commensurate with the other tests, and we would look to 2022 to have update and leadership training from the department, and then incorporate that into a new mandatory examination that would occur in May 2022. So she concurred that although we would ideally give an examination that's mandatory this year, and the uncertainty, she's supportive of it.
Just wanted to hear what expert had to say about that. I know last time her comments were a little inconsistent with what we're considering right now. Anybody else? So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, item number 3, under the business items, a consideration of request of the Office of State Police in accordance with State Police Commission Rule 12.5 to place Trooper Jacob Brown on suspension without pay pending criminal proceedings until the resolution of these criminal charges or there is no longer a need for the suspension. And we have representatives of Mr. Brown here, as well as the department that asked the job. Come up. And ma'am, those seats are reserved for people that are coming up to speak. If you don't mind, let them have those seats.
All right, I'm Mr. Parker Brown. I think I'm sorry, the rain just slowed us real down. I wanted to speak, but if I get an opportunity, I would appreciate it.
All right, we'll take that into consideration right now. We'll hear from the office.
Thank you so much.
And Ms. Brown, what is your relationship to this matter?
I'm a community organizer, and I'm just here for the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Brown, have a seat.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Would you go ahead and identify yourselves for the record, starting with the department?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Lamar Davis, Cromwell State Police.
Michelle Gerard, I'm an attorney for State Police.
Scott Willison, attorney for Jacob Brown.
Jacob Brown.
Good morning. I think it was your request, so we'll hear from you first.
Yes, commission members, the department submitted this request. In the request, we pointed out that there was an arrest made on December 10th, 2020 for charges that relate to on-duty conduct of Trooper Brown. The department has already exhausted the 400 hours of paid administrative leave that are provided for by commission rules. When that leave ran out on or about February 3rd, Trooper Brown was placed on forced compensatory leave pending this request to the commission for suspension without pay.
Does the department know what Trooper Brown's leave balances are?
Yes, sir, we do. Currently, his straight pay time leave balance is 284 hours, 84.5 hours. His time and a half compensatory leave is 306 hours. Annual leave is 700.878 hours, 878 hours.
800 and what, I'm sorry?
700.878.
Is that all you want to say relative to your request?
Sure, if the commission members have any questions, Colonel Davis and I are available.
Colonel, did you have anything you'd like to say at this point?
No, sir. I definitely endorse that. This has been basically the way that we've handled these type of requests in the past, and we'd like to remain consistent in doing so.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to address the commission. Before I address the question of leave, I would like to bring to the commission's attention a matter that affects the integrity of the internal affairs investigation into this matter, as well as the disposition that the commission may arrive at today. I have been involved.
To what extent would the question about the integrity of the internal affairs have a bearing on the question that we're being presented with today?
Because
I'd like to hear that before we get into that discussion.
We request that all administrative matters be stayed pending an executive director's investigation into the leaks that are occurring at the Louisiana State Police Internal Affairs Division that affected this case and the matter involving Chris Hollingsworth. And so that's the nexus between our request for a discussion on those matters and the nexus between this case. So the internal
I'm
affairs...
missing it, but at least I'm not seeing where there's a relationship between that and the issue of leave.
I understand. We asked that Mr. Brown be reinstated. All administrative investigations be stayed pending an investigation into the leaks in the Internal Affairs Division. Until that leak is located and stopped, any administrative proceedings arising out of this incident in Jacob Brown or tainted Mr. Brown was arrested on Monday. Before we reached the jail, WBRZ was already reporting the arrest. Christopher Hollingsworth was suspended and received a notice back in October that he was going to be terminated. I was involved in that IA investigation as well. As we probably all know, there were 17 seconds of audio recording that were released to WBRZ and have now been quoted in national news all over the country. So what I'm experiencing here is a continuation of the leaks in the Internal Affairs Department. We ask that the commission investigate that. The commission is in the best position to order an investigation and determine the source of the leaks and put a stop to this so it does not continue to taint this investigation.
You do acknowledge and understand there would be a right of appeal from any determination that is made by the department?
We understand that.
And you're also aware that on today's agenda is the opportunity for reinstatement of any force to leave if, in fact, Trooper Brown is exonerated.
I understand that. And that was the second point of my request. In lieu of a complete stay of these administrative proceedings based on what we would hope to be an investigation by the commission into the leaks, we certainly request that Mr. Brown be reinstated until such time as an actual investigation is completed that would be able to result in administrative findings. At this point, the administrative investigation is completely tainted, and we believe any suspension without pay would be tainted as well. So we oppose a suspension.
How would you
without pay.
propose that this commission make a finding that would be consistent, make a finding to support what you're asking for before we have an opportunity to hear any of the evidence? You're asking us, in my opinion, you're asking us to put the cart before the horse.
Well, I understand, and we're here today to ask that the commission investigate. In lieu of an investigation, and until such time as an investigation occurs, we ask that all administrative proceedings against Mr. Brown be stayed. If, in the event that the commission determines that the request is substantiated and that Mr. Trooper Brown should be placed on suspension, we request that he be allowed the opportunity to use his non-compensatory K-time and his annual leave.
Well, the last of those may be something within our power.
Understand?
Would anyone make a motion, I'm just putting it on the floor, if there is a motion, that the administrative proceedings be stayed? Fails without a motion. All right. Any other comments?
No other comment.
All right. Did anyone make a motion that Trooper Brown be allowed to use his already accumulated leave during the time of his suspension? I would so move because I think that would be consistent with our previous practices. Yeah, well, but we have to still approve it.
I'll make a motion.
All right, so we have a motion that Trooper Brown be allowed to use his already accumulated leave during the time of his suspension, subject to whatever rights he may or may not have later to seek some remedies. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And y'all are gonna work together on figuring out what his eligibility is and processing that through y'all's procedures. Item number 4 is public hearing to consider proposed change to Chapter 11.21 of the State Police Commission Rules. And the details were set forth in General Circular number 218. And I think we had one request from Mr. Falcon. We received that request already. And Ms. Gerard, is there any position? Well, why don't we take them one at a time? Jason, why don't you go ahead and manage the discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman, I have not received any written comments on this matter since it was posted on January 27th.
And it is the same matter that we had discussion of at the last meeting, and we, as I understood, had kind of a general consensus on what we were trying to accomplish, and we simply came up with the words to try to do it. You can step up, Mr. Falcon. Thank you.
Can't hear back.
No, that's okay.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
So,
So the item that was proposed by the parties at the last month's meeting was a new new state police commission rule, 11.30, which would read restoration of enforced leave. And there were some minor adjustments prior to the publication and on January 27th to put it in its final form. That's before you, and that was promulgated on the 27th.
and as I appreciate, the only change that we made was a change to allow the commission to have discretion to reinstate or adjust the leave that was used, even if there is discipline. But the commission finds that the leave that was taken during the time of forced leave was excessive in light of whatever the findings were. Why don't you read the one little sentence that we added to the...
I'll read 1130B. It is if there is no conviction of the employee of any criminal charge as a result of the criminal investigation, but disciplinary action is imposed on the employee for administrative violations discovered through either the criminal investigation or an administrative investigation, all leave an employee was required to use during either investigation and subsequent proceedings shall be restored by the commission if, after all appeals are exhausted, there is a final determination that there is no cause for the discipline or that the administrative violations were not substantially related to the criminal allegations. The commission may reinstate all or a portion of the leave upon a finding that the required leave was excessive, taking into consideration the discipline imposed and the basis of the discipline.
Okay. And we received no written comments. We already heard from Mr. Falcon that there's no objection to obviously no objection to the way it was written before, and no objection to the addition that we added in. The department have any brief comments relative to the addition that we added in?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have an objection on the final portion of it where it starts. The commission may reinstate all or a portion of leave upon finding that required leave was excessive, taking into consideration the discipline imposed and the basis of the discipline. My objection is based upon one, reasonableness, and two, discretion of the superintendent. We've already agreed that if there are no findings and no determination that any crime has existed or no administrative violations have existed as a result of that investigation, that we would restore their leave. I think it would be to circumvent the superintendent's decision and authority power in order for you all to come in and reinstate that leave after I have also rendered the findings. We find that we've been reasonable. We've agreed to actually meet the terms of the LSTA as well as the other portions there of the rule, and find that this would be an excessive amount of authority taken away from the superintendent. And I think that would create discord within the ranks as well as within the power and discretion of the superintendent.
But Colonel, I might ask you a couple of questions about that. First off, what authority would you have if there were a finding of discipline, although it might have been a finding of some minor infraction that arose out of that investigation? What authority would you have independently to be able to reinstate that leave?
Well, it's not.
I don't think you'd have any.
Well, actually, I do. When you look at the ability, if we're conducting an investigation and find that there are no instances of criminal activity, as well as there are minor administrative activity, we have, and I have the discretion to allow the personnel to go back to work based upon that finding at that point of the investigation. So at that point, I can advise or instruct them to go back to work if I see that there is no harm to the public or harm to the troop or officer. So
That's only when you get to that point.
yes, sir.
You can't retroactively go back and fix the problem that was created by the person being on leave for months and months and using up their accumulated leave, even though ultimately we're talking hypothetically here, obviously, but although ultimately there might be discipline, but it's based on some minor infraction.
Well, the second part of that is what I would call double jeopardy. You know, troopers are authorized leave, they earn leave, and in doing so, when they are taking that leave during that investigation, then we come back and we reinstate that leave. That's double jeopardy. We're now giving them leave to begin with, their earnings. They take that leave, and then we reinstate it. That's unfair to all the other troopers that are out there, and they're earning their leave, and once they take it, they're not reinstated that leave.
But they weren't, the others weren't forced to take it as this particular individual. Is that correct? And then I'll yield to Commissioner Crawford after you answer that question.
Well, in some cases, they are forced to take it, depending upon whether it's military leave or other instances. So they are forced to take that leave, and in turn, they don't get that reinstated.
Commissioner Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel, one of the reasons I brought this subject up at the end of last year, it was based on my experience as the fire chief in Shreveport. And when we had individuals who I had to discipline for extended periods of time for an investigation, criminal investigation as well as an internal investigation. When those individuals were cleared of all those charges criminally, and if I had imposed discipline, if the Civil Service Board had overturned my discipline, they were completely made whole, which means taking time away from an officer, a trooper, or a firefighter. I can tell you, based on my own experience as years of a fire chief, that time off is not vacation time for them. It is painstaking. I've seen it. I've talked to family members, wives, husbands, and for individuals who were under investigation and who were forced to take vacation leave. They're not on the beach somewhere generally. They are working with their attorneys. It's an arduous process, but they want it to get over with as soon as possible. And so it's, just in my view, it's very different than somebody who is taking vacation to relax and to recharge their batteries while they're off. And so when we look at this holistically as a commission, we look at the fact that if somebody is forced to take a benefit, that's discipline. Whether you're taking pay from them or you're taking a benefit of vacation or leave for them and forcing them to use it, something that they're not volunteering to do. That's something I know that other civil service branches, such as fire and police for the state, that's how they view it. And when those officers are exonerated at that level, they get all of their time back. So, and I understand your argument, and certainly we're not trying to tie your hands in any way. I'm trying to look at this, you know, if you serve for 20 years as the colonel, I'm looking for the next colonel to have the same benefit, because how you react and how you reinstate somebody's leave, and I think you're a fair man. I think you would do the right thing. That's not to say the next person in that seat would do the right thing. That's why we have rules up here that supersede whoever the colonel is. And so that's why we have to take a look at this from a holistic position. So I appreciate your comments.
Well, first of all, I appreciate, and I totally agree with you. If they are cleared, they should have their time reinstated. However, whenever there are instances whereby they have been found to have been guilty of something that is a result of that investigation that's closely related to it, then that's when we start to cross the line there. Secondly, as the colonel, my job is to make sure that we're not putting that trooper and or the public in harm's way. So I have to make that decision at that point in time to safeguard not only that trooper, but also the public. And if the result of me doing that and conducting an investigation leads to some other charges that's closely resembled to that, then for you all to come back and take that time away and reinstate that time, I think would again circumvent the authority and discretion there. So I appreciate it, and I totally agree with you. If they are cleared, then reinstate the time. But we have processes in place. We have disciplinary review committees. We have things in place to ensure that we are being fair and equitable about not only the discipline that we hand out, but the procedures and policies in which we enforce. So I would ask that you trust that system, not just me, but the system in which we have in place in order to manage those troopers and their behavior.
and I appreciate those comments, Colonel. I think, let me rephrase what I was saying a while ago was, and I think this additional change to the rules specifically was to say, if you had a member that was off for 6 months, and you forced him, and he exhausted all of his leave, he took the 400 hours that's allowed to him at your discretion at paid leave, he's used all his leave, he was charged with a high-level offense, maybe, so let's just say a terminating offense, along with a criminal charge. And then the criminal charge is dropped, you find some minor violation that he's charged with, that normally, maybe you issue a letter of reprimand, or you issue a 10-day suspension. Now, he's used 6 months of all of his leave. He may have exhausted everything he's got. He's got no vacation time left, he's got no K time left, and all he ended up with was a letter of reprimand or a 2 or 3 day suspension, something minor, certainly not something that was to the level that it was originally when the charges were filed. I think that's what this board is concerned about, not you making a bad decision to protect the public, as you said, and not keeping somebody from that public contact. I think what we're looking at is to provide a checks and balance, and that's what this board is about after all, is to provide that trooper with an option for an appeal, that if whoever is in that supervisory position provides him what he feels is not, I was off for 6 months, I got a letter of reprimand, I've used all my vacation time, and they've only given me maybe a month back. I'd like to appeal that to the commission to get more of my time back that's more equitable. And that's all we're saying. I mean, that would provide you and the state an opportunity to present your case as to why you decided to provide a certain amount of time back based on the findings and the discipline that was administered. And so you would still be able to bring that to the board, state your case, but the trooper would have an opportunity to state his case as well. That's all we're saying.
I think we've already agreed to that, whereby there is no findings that's related to the original charges, then the trooper gets their time back reinstated. I think we've already agreed to that. So I think this may be an overreach.
I have a few comments, Commissioners. First of all, the discipline does not include forced leave. Once again, that's a business decision that the rules give the superintendent to make in managing the department. My concern with the discretion is, in his discretion, if he determines at whatever point in the investigation the trooper needs to remain on leave or he wants to return him, that's an administrative business decision he makes for the agency.
Sure.
And when the commission considers that, they're put in a position of substituting their discretion for the colonel's discretion. When you made mention of appeal, it causes me concern that the commission's jurisdiction is going to be expanded because the Constitution limits their right to hear appeals of discipline.
But Ms. Gerard, just as was pointed out earlier, if it takes 5 months before the colonel comes to the point where he realizes, not because he hasn't been doing his job, because I have plenty of respect, as he knows, for our colonel, but for whatever reason, it takes 5 months before he realizes that, oh, I should put this person back to work, because even though there might be something going on, there might be some discipline that might be justified, it doesn't justify me keeping him off work any longer. He does not have the power to reinstate those 5 months of forced leave that he now determines should have never taken place. If we don't put this in the rule, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what he just told me, if we don't put this in the rule, then there'll be no one that has the power to reinstate those 5 months that should have never been forced.
Well, the purpose of the leave is to give the department the time to investigate. So to come on the back end and say it wasn't justified, I don't think is wording that I would use. Is to say that when they're cleared of everything, it's reasonable to restore the leave. If at some point in time the colonel decides it's not as egregious as thought and the person's no longer a danger or a threat, or there's no reason to keep them out on leave, he can always return them to duty. But I guess I'm
But he
reading.
can't give them the time back, and that's what we're saying.
The way the rule's written, there's one part that says that we shall restore it. It's only in the course.
You shall under the limits, sir. We all agree that's correct. Nobody objects to that. You shall restore it under the circumstances that set forth. You will not restore it if there is discipline imposed, period, is what the way the rule is written unless we add that sentence to it.
I thought the part that was put in there that, the employee required to use leave shall be restored by the commission if, after all appeals are exhausted, there's a final determination there was no cause for the discipline, or that the administrative violations were not substantially related to the criminal allegation.
You can still have a substantially related activity that is of a very minor circumstance. I'm gonna use an exaggerated hypothetical just to make the point. That people think that he committed armed robbery and he committed shoplifting. Okay? Just a possible example. It's related. It's still taking the same object that people thought he committed armed robbery to take. But, you know, you now have someone who has lost 5 of the 6 months of suspension because nobody has the power to reinstate that in a situation that maybe didn't warrant that much of a discipline, and nobody has the power to reinstate that 5 months of leave.
Whenever you're conducting investigations, we can't put them on a timeline. And to go back and reinstate because it took that amount of time to conduct a thorough investigation, I think would be really contrary to getting the outcome in which we're attempting to see. I understand where you're going. I totally do. And that's why I was in total agreement that if it's not significantly related, even though it may be an administrative investigation or administrative finding, but if it's not significantly related to that original investigation, then I'm willing to restore it. But to come back, because it took 4 months to conduct an investigation, a thorough investigation, and reinstate that trooper's time, because you all may, again, I am basing my findings on law, I'm basing my findings on the evidence that's been presented and on the training of not just me, but of my investigators. Okay, and I think for you all to come back and say, well, here's the finding based on my experience, which is, and with all due respect, law enforcement, that's contrary to what we're trying to achieve. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to change the behavior so that they do not get to this point and they're not in front of you and we're not conducting those investigations. But in order to do so, we have to be able to conduct thorough investigations without troopers getting all of that time back. If it is related, and it happens that it took 4 months to get to that point, then I think it's prudent that we allow that time to stand.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Commissioner Mayor.
The concern is the blending of a criminal and administrative investigation. A criminal investigation has 0 time limits. You have as much time as you can or need to investigate that particular crime or the possibility of a crime. The administrative investigations have limitations for that reason. So it's ripe for abuse potentially where a employee is being investigated for payroll fraud, which a lot of, most things can be called payroll fraud in regards to timesheets, etc. If the employee is eventually was put on or forced leave for payroll fraud, eventually found that there was a policy violation that their time did not reflect the timesheet, which is a policy violation. As it stands now, without the addition, they would not get that, let's say, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months time back, when the actual administrative punishment or discipline is a week or a letter of reprimand. Those are the concerns that this board had from the beginning, and this is the attempt to address that and give some oversight, not take your authority away to make those decisions, but again, as Vice Chairman said, to oversee potential abuse by, again, in this situation, sometimes previous colonels and future colonels. All right, so that's the concern that I have, and I think that I brought up some issues the issue last month in regards to the rule that was presented by the LSTA and the department that did not give the commission that oversight, and I appreciate the language, Chairman, that addresses that concern that I had.
And I certainly appreciate that. I can assure you there's not a superintendent, there's not a chief, there's not a sheriff that want any of their personnel sitting on the sideline when they should be out there protecting the public safety. There's not any one of us. We invest an inordinate amount of money, time, and effort to train our personnel. We want them out there doing their jobs. There's not one that I want sitting on the sideline. But when there comes a time that we have to conduct these investigations, we have to do so, and I think that we need to be able to conduct them without fear of, okay, well, I need to rush this investigation because what I don't want to do is have to give this guy 5 months of time. Okay? That impacts the investigations. That impacts the investigators.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Commissioner. Yes, ma'am.
It's okay.
Unfortunately, I'm accustomed to that.
It's okay, I understand, I'm the only character, right? No problem. Colonel, and I just want to have a couple clarifying questions. It's your concern that with this new verbiage, the commission is overstepping its boundary and somewhat taking the authority away from the superintendent's decision, correct, or the colonel's decision, correct?
That's one concern.
That's one of the concerns there. And on our side of it, it's just more so of the checks and balances on those cases that involves a total clearing. Like this was the allegations, nothing was found, absolutely, there's no sustained on anything on it. You know, you all did your 4-month, 5-month, however long your investigation was, and the trooper was absolutely cleared of everything. Are we on each side, I believe, are in agreement that that trooper should be reinstated for that forced leave that he was made to take, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So the only issue comes up when we're talking about when we have these same types of allegations. However, the higher charge or allegation is found to be clear, but there's another administrative charge that is sustained. That's the issue of, or the caveat of, okay, so do they get all of the forced leave back? Do they get some of it back? If the penalty from that administrative charge, although it still took that time of the investigation to find that, or to come to that disposition, that administrative charge at most would have been maybe a 10-day suspension or so, that they should be compensated some or all of that time back. So what is the department's stance on that, I guess is my question.
The stance is, if they took that amount of time for us to conduct the investigation because of something that the trooper did,
yes,
then that's what it took.
okay.
And I do not believe that when you get to a point, and if someone goes out there and shoplifts, and there's an investigation and there are things that take place, they don't get restored. The public doesn't get restored any of the time that they lose, any of anything. And when there's an outcry that the public is saying, hey, police officers are being treated special, because when I get arrested, I do not get any time back. I do not get this back. But yet we're now giving them time back for something that they did, that they initiated, which caused us to investigate.
And I actually like Commissioner Zmira's example better than mine. His example of the issue of making a mistake on the timesheet as opposed to truly committing payroll fraud is where a person can still get an administrative ding for that, can still get administrative penalty for that, but it wasn't. So I think Commissioner Zmira's example was much better thought out than mine as to where the situation might apply. But
I
anyway.
understand that, Mr. Chairman, but at the same time, that's one situation. Now, when you write this rule, it encompasses all situations.
But you have to, just like we have to trust your discretion, Colonel,
Right.
you've got to trust the discretion that this commission is not going to abuse a power that is designed to deal with maybe just that 1 or 2 situations that many times this issue can come to us and we simply say, well, we don't. It doesn't say we shall reinstate it. It says we have discretion to reinstate it.
But I thought it did say you shall.
No. It says we have discretion to reinstate some or all of that leave. It puts the power to at least address the question in somebody's hands because no one has that power at the state if we don't have that language in there. To be for that period of time until you make that determination to put it back to work. No, it does not say shall. It said that we may do that. Yes, sir. Just briefly,
I think the issue is this, this additional language does not take away the authority of the colonel that he has. He can't, as I understand it, he could not restore the leave on his own.
That
So
was my
all
first
we
question.
do, all this does.
Yeah, that was why I asked that question first. And
That's
the
right.
answer is he can't.
He can't, so all this does is establish the power of this body to do it under the right circumstances. Not in every circumstance, but in egregious circumstances that warrant y'all consideration. And that's the point.
And my only counter to that is, again, when we're dealing with investigations and evidence, I have a non-law enforcement body determining egregiousness or level of egregiousness based upon what? I just don't know if that actually is the intent there. And I'll rest there. I appreciate your concern, I really am. I will be the first to tell you, with our troopers, I want the best for them. Okay? I really do, because when they're healthy, when they're made whole, and they're out there performing their tasks and their duties, they're not thinking about things like this. But as the superintendent, I also have a responsibility to our department as well as to our public to ensure that our troopers are doing the right thing for the right reason.
Thank you. Any other discussion, any commissioner?
Just a quick
Commissioner
follow-up.
Crawford.
I want to be very clear that in no way is this rule intended, or will it be interpreted, at least by this commissioner, I don't believe this body, to interfere, to infer that the colonel or the administration of the Louisiana State Troopers is not doing their job in properly disciplining, holding troopers accountable. This rule in no way does that. What it does is, and I'll go back to Commissioner Mears' example. If you have a trooper in good standing who has done his job, who has served the public, who has defended and risked his life, and he comes across a criminal charge, allegation, you have a responsibility to investigate that. If he's charged criminally. The criminal courts and that system has an obligation to investigate that. If that charge is found not to be criminal, but yet your investigation, because you had to wait for the criminal investigation, takes 4 months, seems to be the month we're landing on, and you feel like responsibly that he violated a department rule, but not an egregious department rule, something minor. You use the example of he filled out a form incorrectly, or he did something that solicited a 2 or 3 day suspension that was appealable to this body, but yet he was forced to exhaust 4 months of leave. I mean, that's all we're saying is that is a due benefit of that trooper. And like I said, when he's off on those 4 months, he's not on vacation. And Colonel, you're dealing the hand that you have. You have to abide by the rules that you have for your investigations, and you do your job that way. But that has nothing to do with the leave that trooper is having to exhaust in your investigation. It has nothing to do with it. It doesn't say anything about your investigation. It doesn't infer that we're getting involved in the investigation. It doesn't even mean that we don't agree with your investigation and your discipline that you've imposed. What it does is it allows you, actually, because you have no mechanism today to restore any of that leave of 4 months. If you so choose, and you said, you know what, this guy was off 4 months, and he's used all of his vacation leave. He can't take vacation next year because he doesn't even have any leave. And really, basically, all I've got is a letter of reprimand because he did violate some rules, and I have to enforce those rules. I have to hold people accountable. But you know what? It didn't rise to the occasion to where he had to use all of his vacation. I wish, as the colonel, I could give him some of that time back. Well, today you can't do that. This rule allows you, as the colonel, to come back to this body and say, hey, I'd like to, in my opinion, I would like to reinstate half of his time for this charge. I think that's equitable for what we found and what we ended up disciplining for. And it also allows the trooper that opportunity to come back and say, I'd like all my time back, for instance. And then it allows this body to weigh all of that evidence and then make a decision. But it in no way, like I said, it's two different issues. This doesn't involve, interfere with any investigation or discipline that you decide to administer. That is your right. It has to do with a benefit side, and I think that this body is lawfully able to engage in restoring that if that happens to be the case that I just described. That's just my opinion.
In that case, you said it gives me the authority.
It gives you the authority to come back to this body and ask for that time to be reduced. If he had to take 4 months off, you could come back and say, as the colonel, I don't think that's equitable that this young man, this young woman, this trooper who's out there, lose all of their vacation. Because at the end of the day, when all the smoke cleared and the criminal charge was dismissed and you and your men and women of your administration found that this was a very minor charge, but it was still a charge, and you yourself said, you know what, it's not equitable for them losing all of their vacation. I'm going to go back to the commission and I'm going to ask for them to restore your leave that you had to use, or part of this leave, and then you can state your case as to where this was the discipline that was administered. I believe this equitable time off is a good balance, and then the trooper could do the same thing. Right now, you have no way of doing that. That's all.
I would just echo Commissioner Cropper's statement, and also certainly this commission in evaluating, because the officer would have a right to appeal the disciplinary finding. You certainly don't want this commission worrying when it's trying to decide whether it will affirm the disciplinary finding. You don't want this commission worrying about, dang, if we affirm that disciplinary finding, we just sentence this guy to lose 4 months of leave for what might be a minor offense. You don't want that in the back of the minds of the commissioners as they evaluate your disciplinary decisions now, do you?
My main concern, as far as the commission's concerned, is if there's a disciplinary finding, that's your job. I'm not going to get in the midst of what your jobs are with regards to that discipline. My job is to impose discipline. My job is also to conduct an investigation, fair and impartial investigations. And in doing so, I want to be able to do so if it takes 4 months, if it takes 2 months, if it takes 2 days. Rest assured that, again, I do not want any trooper out of 4 months. We're going to be diligent on conducting those investigations. And we have processes. We also have policies and procedures in place. And whenever troopers conduct their business or act in a way that warrants an investigation, and in turn, it takes 2, 3, 4 months to conduct that investigation, they understand that we are teaching our troopers, we are training, we're also educating them on the processes. So I would just have to respectfully disagree with that, but I understand your point.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments, Colonel. Any other discussion with any other commissioners?
One last statement about that. We don't always control the investigations. There was one trooper that was arrested by an outside agency. All charges were dropped, and that was a very lengthy investigation. And this rule would apply to that gentleman, to that trooper. But we don't always control our investigations, and some other agencies take extremely a long time. And he lost about 8 months of leave, which you can never recuperate.
Am I correct in understanding that if this rule is written without the part I'm contesting, if this rule is written, which means that because all of those charges were dropped, he would have been reinstated all of his time, would that apply regardless of, without the widened portion of this rule? Would he have gotten his time back?
No, I think there was a administrative violation associated with it, very minor.
You think, or are you sure?
I'm not sure.
And that's the problem we have.
But whether it applied to that case or not, that is the potential scenario that we got to deal with.
And in this case, as we agreed, he would have gotten all of his time back.
No, but you're assuming that because he can't recall that was the case, but assume that to be the case, that doesn't mean that's going to be the case next time.
Yes, sir.
But anyway, we beat it dead. We beat it dead horse here.
Call for the question.
Question's been called up. All in favor?
Aye.
I thought we did already. So you mean a motion to call the question or a motion on the
resolution.
We had a motion on the resolution just before we started our
Just want to
discussion.
make sure.
Am I correct?
I don't call that. we
Okay,
have-
well then I'm mistaken.
Yeah, to
Then
adopt
we need a
the-
motion to, we need a,
Vice chair is here.
there you go, thank you. That's why he's here to keep me straight.
I don't even know what agenda we're.
We're on business item number, 4. And I understand we don't have a motion, so is there a motion relative to, business item number 4?
I would move that we adopt the language as set forth in the proposal.
Okay. And we have a second.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Now, I understand, there is another potential item relative to the rules.
No, Mr. Chairman, General Circular number 218, it announced the public hearing to consider changes to Chapter 11 and also Chapter 21, Rule 21.2.1, which was just adopted by this commission. I wanted to make the commission aware that the Civil Service Commission, on an emergency basis, also adopted a rule under that same general provision and special COVID leave related to vaccinations and the encouragement of state employees to seek out and receive vaccinations. And I would, if the commission is so inclined, it could also consider adopting a similar provision under 21.2.1. And I have verbiage proposed if you would
Does
like.
this have to be promulgated first? Or is it something we can take up at this meeting?
And I guess that's the,
There's an exception.
there is an emergency provision, and the Civil Service adopted theirs on an emergency basis, under their emergency rules under Chapter 2. We also have provisions as such, but also we did publish public notice that we would have a public hearing on Rule 21.2.1. This provision was not listed, so if the commission would like to consider it, it would have to vote first to consider this amendment, and then allow public comment.
Because it's added to the agenda.
Correct. So that's up for discussion if you wanted to do.
But additional information, as we currently understand, is what?
Is that additionally, the department has advised that there's not a concern at this point with state troopers and their ability to seek out a vaccination because they're allowed to do so while on duty.
So in light of that, I would request if the rest of the commission so find a motion that maybe we defer this at this point because it's not really an emergency situation. Publish it and take it up at a later meeting.
Certainly. I just want to make you aware that's what had occurred, and this would be very potentially similar for continuity across the department. So I'll bring it to your attention.
So do we have a motion?
Second.
All right, so the motion is to defer consideration of this until after publication at the next meeting. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it, so just publish it and we'll take it up at the next meeting. Any other proposed changes that we need to consider?
Not this time. Not this time.
We'll move on to agenda item number 5, consideration of the request of the Office of State Police to reinstate the leave hours for 10 employees in accordance with the provisions of State Police Commission Rule 21.2.1 21.2.1E. And is there a representative here from the State Police to make that proposal? Hey, Colonel, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, in this particular instance, we've had some employees that fell in what I call a gap. They were not covered under certain rules dealing with the pandemic. And what we've requested is that because they were not covered, which means that they had to use their leave and they were not compensated, that leave be reinstated. I know that's kind of contrary to what I just.
I wasn't giving you that.
But I wanted to let you know that I am fair. So there were 10 employees that was actually covered, and we found that, that should have been reinstated, so we have, permission to go.
Do we have a motion relative to the request? A motion and second. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I think there are additional employees that HR did not identify. What is, does it have to come to the board each time, or is it something that the executive director can approve? Jason?
Yeah, Commissioner Meyer, under the approval of the verbiage under Chapter 21 that was just adopted, the up to 80 hours may be approved at my level. Anything beyond that or in concern would go to the commission consideration.
And we will gladly come up and petition for it.
Thank you, Colonel.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Colonel, for your time. Takes us to item number 7 on the agenda, the director's report.
And Commissioners, the only item I have on the director's report is the expenditures for the commission, which are presented for your review. And if there are no questions, is to remind you that also that our next month's meeting will be at 10 o'clock on March 11th. And then there is upcoming reminders that I'll provide regarding financial disclosures from the board packets that are due in May. So I'll be reminding you on those. That's all I have for my director's report.
Thank you. Okay, at this point is an opportunity to address the commission by employees or others on matters not on the agenda. Did we receive any requests?
I don't believe we did.
We'll entertain a motion to adjourn. You notice how fast I get that motion? Move and second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.